In the afternoon heat of July 12th, 1998, on the Parnell Ranch, Juan Martinez, his brother Jose, and Jose's two children, Jack 5 and Aerel 3, were killed and buried in a shallow grave in a berry bramble not far from where Jose's wife and the children's mother was being beaten and raped by Arturo Juarez Suarez. The days immediately following the attack would have law enforcement searching to bring Suarez to justice. On this episode of California True Crime, Arturo Juarez Suarez and the Martinez Family Murders, Part 2. Welcome again to the second part of our exploration of the Martinez family murders from Auburn, California in 1998. With me are Jessica and Sean. How are you both doing?
Really good.
I'm good. I'm interested in what happens next and hopefully bringing this murderer to justice.
Yeah, I hope we don't have to hear that detail too much. This is a hard one.
Before we begin the next stage of the case, I would like to remind everyone that this story may not be for everyone. We're covering the brutal rape and beating of Yolanda, as well as the murder of her family, including her two young children. So if this might be a trigger for you, you might want to skip this episode. Listener discretion is advised. So to recap where we were, the Martinez family were executed by Suarez on July 12th, 1998 at the Parnell Ranch in Auburn, California. Arturo Juarez Suarez would rape and beat Yolanda until she passed out. When she was able to regain consciousness, she was able to escape and made her way to the ranch house where Dorothy Parnell, wife and co-owner of the Parnell Ranch, was able to call the sheriffs, who immediately responded and found Yolanda. A mountain of evidence, as well as the fact that Suarez was nowhere to be found, pointed to him as the perpetrator, as well as Yolanda calling out his name as the one who did this to her almost immediately when the police arrived. The next day, when they began their investigate the crime scene more thoroughly, they found the shallow grave that was mentioned in the opening of the episode. The medical examiner's report will state that the two older men were killed by gunshot wounds to their heads at close proximity, while the two children were beaten by something, more than likely one of the shovels that was found near the grave, and were buried alive where they would die from suffocation. Now, before we continue, do either of you have anything that you'd like to add or thoughts since the last time we were together about this case, what you thought about or anything that stuck with you?
I just had a quick question. Is there anything in your research that would indicate that the police are called, they get there around 9:30, that the nighttime hindered their search?
I did not find any reports where the police specifically called to that. I think the fact that it was late at night, that if you're familiar, if you haven't, and we'll have some pictures of kind of what the countryside looks like, that this does remind me a little bit of the search for Miller when you reported on the Houston case. Is this ranch is huge and it's kind of out of the place. I won't say it's the middle of nowhere because it's not, but it is in the countryside. And I think with a violent offender, you have missing people. I think the sheriff's department and eventually when the FBI brought in, everything is done very, very deliberately and by the book. So I think they're trying to be as meticulous as possible and are more concerned with the victim that they have in their hands that are trying to help her. So, and I think that's one of the reasons why when they come back the next day, it's not like, oh, we're taking care of her and then we're not doing anything over the night. The police will talk about, like, they are canvassing the area. They're sending out other patrols to be on the lookout, those kind of things. But since this space is so big that they really want to do this the right way, and nighttime is a harder time to search this kind of country. Now, at this time, I'd like to jump again around a little bit to discuss some of what Suarez was doing in the days that were leading up to the murders and the rape. So at the trial, Jack and Jacob Parnell, the owner of the ranch, and his son, where the crime took place, will testify that Suarez was doing a bunch of different stuff in the hours and days leading up to the crime. So sometime in the late morning on the day in question, this is again July 12th, Suarez was asked to clean an area near a barn on the ranch. It's a typical duty that you would do, go in and, hey, I need you to clean out the barn. Now, when asked to do this, the Parnells would actually both say that he was really abrupt with them, which was completely out of character. Both Parnells will talk about the fact that Suarez was actually a pretty good employee. He seemed always kind of affable and willing to pitch in and do whatever was asked. And this time, though, that was one of the things that they did remember, that he was really kind of surly and kind of argumentative early in the day. Later that day, around 5 o'clock, Jack Parnell would see Suarez driving Martinez's car, the Martinez family car, way faster than usual. So he'll actually see, now remember, at that one of those points, when Suarez comes back and talks to Yolanda, he grabs the car keys and says, I'm going to go down to the store for some snacks. Do you need anything? And he tears out of there, going a lot faster than you probably should. And again, this is something that sticks out in Jack's mind, and he comments on that. Around 6:30 or 7 o'clock, Jacob, Jack's son, would testify that he sees Yolanda and the children walking around the ranch. Now, since the family appeared close and were often at the ranch, it didn't really seem that odd. But as far as setting up a time frame, we do see that, this stuff is happening around. People are noticing things. But again, like Jacob said, the Martinezes were there all the time. It wasn't that weird. About 7:30 or so, Jacob would later testify in court that he saw Suarez driving a tractor with a trailer. Never really brings this up very much, but it's a point that this would be after the murder, after the rape. He's driving a tractor trailer, whether it's hauling dirt to cover up the bodies or the shallow grave or what. That detail is never really brought back too much. He would also say that sometime before this, in the days and weeks leading prior to this, so this is kind of in the past, Jacob will say that he does see Suarez coming from a target range that had been set up on the Parnell Ranch, carrying a small caliber rifle, the .22 rifle that was found in his trailer. And again, Jacob points out this was not that common. Yeah, we have a shooting range. So again, this kind of tells you how big this Parnell Ranch is. It's big enough that they have set aside some of their land as a shooting range. And yeah, we go out there and shoot cans or targets or whatever. We don't often see Suarez out at this place. And on this particular day, I see him walking back with, a rifle.
So does this testimony go towards him planning this event?
Yeah, the prosecution brings this stuff up to kind of set the stage, and will become clear as we see what Suarez's defense attorneys try to do, is that it was not a heat of passion crime. It wasn't, I flipped out and this happened. It was a methodical, well thought out, I'm going to plan this, to such the extent that the investigators, and the reason why we brought this up kind of in the first episode, is when the investigators look at the shallow grave is as the sheriff puts it, it's a 90-degree perfectly cut grave, which, if you've ever tried digging holes, it's not like something I'm going to hastily just dig a quick hole, dump something in, and cover dirt. I went out, I took the time to make a perfectly square grave-like hole, cleared the dirt out, and that couldn't have been done in the that's something that took forethought. In the early morning hours of Monday, July 13th, Suarez would enter a drugstore in Auburn and would purchase a shirt and a cowboy hat. He would get change from the cashier to use at a payphone located outside. Now, just an aside for anybody that's listening, remember, a payphone, if you aren't familiar, is a phone that would be in public that you would pay money to use. I only say that because it really harkens back to this kind of caught me reading this account of him using a payphone in 1998. And I know for us it's not that long ago, but it seems like such a lifetime ago that we used payphones. What he's going to do is he's going to place a call to his cousin, Pablo Suarez, and he's going to be asked to be picked up in Sacramento. When he arrives, Suarez will actually tell Pablo that he had been in a fight. He eventually will confess to Pablo that he had killed the Martinez family, as well as beating Yolanda. He will confess to all of this, but he will not confess to the rape or the fact that he had murdered the children. So what he tells his cousin is, yeah, I got into a fight. I ended up killing Juan and Jose. I beat Yolanda, and he just leaves it at that. That same night, he leaves Pablo's house in Sacramento completely and heads south. The next day, Tuesday, July 14th, Suarez would arrive at Josefina Torres Yane's house in Wilmington, which is a neighborhood in the harbor region of LA. She lives there with Jose Lucho and their children. Now, Wilmington's about a 10-hour bus ride from Sacramento. I say a bus ride because police and investigators, and eventually when they do arrest Suarez, they'll realize that that's how he get. Because early on, some investigators are like, well, how did he get from, he leaves the car in Sacramento. How does he get there? Well, traveling by bus is both cost effective and also nobody really asks questions on buses too much. So they'll determine that that's how he was able to get from Northern California to Southern California. Suarez would tell Josefina Torres, that he had shot and killed his brothers-in-law in self-defense because they were going to kill him. So he says, yes, I did kill them, but it was in self-defense. This time, though, unlike what he did with his cousin in Northern California, he tells her that he did, in fact, kill the two children by hitting them with a stick or shovel. He would tell her that he didn't know why he killed them. He would say that they were crying and it made him nervous. So I killed them. Again, he would not mention that he had raped Yolanda. He would say that he had beat her, and he would say he tied her up, but he had no mention of the rape. He would continue to say that he had gotten into an argument with the two brothers, and they attacked him first, and he shot them in self-defense. Torres actually will be called to testify at trial, and she says that it was a week earlier that Suarez would tell her that his in-laws wanted to kill him, and he wanted to commit suicide. It would be on Wednesday, July 15th, that law enforcement would catch up with Suarez and arrest him at the apartment. Present at the arrest were Long Beach Police Detective Dennis Robbins and FBI agent Elizabeth Stevens. These officers would transport Suarez to the local station for processing. On the way to the station, Suarez would ask them in Spanish why he was being arrested. Special Agent Stevens, who is actually a fluent Spanish speaker, would tell him that he was being arrested for the 4 murders and the rape of Yolanda. He would again say he didn't rape Yolanda. He would also say that he was planning on leaving for Mexico the following day. The story of how they were able to track him to the apartment hinges on the hours following the murders and rape. It seems they had been tracking him from the drugstore in Auburn, California. At the time, the FBI were called in right away, believed that he was going to make his way from Mexico as soon as possible. Now, this was due, and I thought this was kind of, it shows to the expertise of when they're initially doing that investigation. This was due to the fact that his parents and estranged wife and children were all in Mexico. So first off, he has a tie to Mexico. In fact, Special Agent Jeffrey Reinick, who we've talked about before on this show, and again, a huge fan of his book, In the Name of the Children, which, again, I believe everybody should read. It's an amazing account, especially of some cases in California. But he's going to be interviewed by the Sacramento Bee, and he states that there was a lot of evidence that Suarez was going to make for Mexico and try to cross the border. This was due mainly to a thorough examination of the ranch and his phone records and mail. So they saw phone calls going to Mexico. They saw mail coming from letters and postcards and things like coming from his family. So it was a really, and it showed a pattern of regular correspondence. So they're thinking if he's on the run, he's going to go back to where he has a connection. He's going to run to Mexico. They also knew that time, as with all the cases, that time really is of importance, because if he makes it to the border, that means it's going to be even harder to get justice for the Martinez family, because they're going to have, now it's no longer just a crime in California. It's now an international incident where they have to go and talk to consulates and they have to get extradition orders and the whole 9 yards. Even with a country that's on good relations with the United States like Mexico, it's still an issue. So their goal is we have to track him down and get him before he crosses the border. Now, that was until he walked into the Longs at Elms Avenue in Auburn, California. Now, Longs, if you remember, it really is CVS. It's what CVS was before it was CVS. So Longs it's a drugstore. This actual store is actually still there. You can go and visit it. It's on the corner of Elm Avenue in Auburn, California. And there's a clerk that worked there the early morning shift by the name of Heidi McDonald. She just happened to be the wife of Placer County Sheriff Sergeant Bob McDonald. Now, when the news the next morning was around that there was a murder at the Parnell Ranch and that the murderer may have come through Auburn, and there was a description of the person and that he might be on the run, she immediately became suspicious of one of the customers from the day before. So she goes back into the store, reviews the video surveillance tapes, and finds a person that matches the description and that had started to be circulated. He had come into the store. Again, remember, he bought a shirt and a cowboy hat and gets changed to use as the payphone. She notifies her husband, who informs the FBI that there is a possible break in the case. Placer County Sheriff's Lieutenant Dan Hall runs all the numbers that were called from that particular payphone. This data is then given over to the FBI. This is where FBI analyst Ginger Kernis comes in. She's going to run all of the information and make all the connections between the numbers called on the payphone and the numbers that have been dialed from the ranch. So basically her job is to take all of this data, all of the payphone phone calls, all of the mail addresses and phone numbers, all of the calls from the ranch, and try to make any connections that's possible. So she makes a connection to Suarez's brother who lives in Illinois. So this is where it gets a little bit kind of like spiderwebby. So one of the calls, she notices that a number that's repeated a bunch is from Suarez's phone on the Parnell Ranch to Suarez's brother, who lives in Illinois. Now, this brother is married, so Suarez's brother's brother-in-law, to a woman who lives in Wilmington, California, which happens to be the same number that was dialed from the Long's drugstore. So before we go on, does that connection, that thin connection make sense?
Yeah, and it's crazy.
Yeah, right. And so I think nowadays we're so used to seeing on TV or movies where it was like, oh, I'm going to a computer and I'm going to have an algorithm dump all of this data in. And in '98, I'm not 100% sure. I have images of this person sitting behind a desk with, a 1998 486 computer and then going through all of these phone numbers trying to make these connections.
Yeah, giant dot matrix paper. This is all before. This is actually all before like the Patriot Act, which made it extremely easy for them to just look through anything. So,
right, and I'm glad you bring that up, Sean, because I do want to shout out to this, and not only because we have Special Agent Reineck in this, but I'm reading this. It is really interesting that the agencies in California all worked together really well. The FBI, which again, there's a field office in Sacramento. It's local. There's a threat that this person might be crossing a border. There's a possible kidnapping early on when they didn't realize that the victims were killed. But in what's reported, there is no fight between. It's not like we see on the movies where the FBI and local law enforcement go head to head. No, it's like everybody's pulling together, which I think is really cool, including Long Beach police officers in LA when they finally arrest him in Wilmington. Now, this woman's address in Wilmington, this is Torres's residence and the number that Suarez calls the night of the rape and the murder. So this particular number is one of the numbers that he calls from the Long's drugstore and says, I'm headed down south. I'll be there and, whenever I can. In fact, Sheriff Ed Bonner will credit Kemis with pulling all of this data together and directly leading to the capture of Suarez before he gets across the border, which again, I think is kind of cool because oftentimes, and again, I'm filtering this through somebody who watches a lot of movies and TV with police and stuff. And I know as a kid growing up in the 80s, you always saw it was like the FBI would be fighting against the local police would be ruffled that the FBI is in this. And here's a local police officer saying, no. The reason why we were able to catch this is because this analyst behind the scenes took all of this data and was able to capture it and figure it out and find out where this person was going to be. And they wouldn't have been able to do that without this person's help. So I think that was really interesting.
I find it very interesting that he even stops. Wilmington, you're already 10 hours south. What would it be like on a bus, which takes a while? 3 or 4 hours to the border by then?
Yeah, it would be another 3 hours by car. So you figure like maybe double that on a bus for all the stops. And really there is no good reason that I saw reported anywhere why he would stop in Wilmington, other than the fact that by that point he'd been going on probably close to 24 hours straight and maybe needed a rest or break. I mean, he did stay there for, I believe, a full day before he got arrested. So, maybe gathering money, supplies, or whatever, and to go across the border. And again, it's not. So I'm not 100% sure why. Yeah, you're right. It would have been easier just to keep going.
Did any of the people he stayed with or talked to call the police?
No. And again, I think this might speak to a distrust of law enforcement, possibly, between the community, between the Hispanic community. It could also be the fact that, and we see this in a lot of times, the fear of wanting to I don't want to get involved, because by now he's implicated his cousin in Sacramento, his brother in Illinois, and now his brother's sister-in-law in LA or Wilmington. So there's nothing reported like why they didn't call the cops. There's also no prosecution against them for aiding and abetting.
Gamarjoba, my name is Roberto, and I would like to sincerely thank you for taking the time to check out my podcast, The History of Sacramento, Georgia. I'm both sorry and happy to report that this beautiful and fascinating country is, to my great surprise, criminally underrated in the history world. The birthplace of wine, the second Christian kingdom, the land of fantastic food, nearly superhuman dancers and musicians, and perhaps, most importantly, a people that have preserved their culture, pride, and independence after centuries of one conquest after another. So, let us celebrate this beautiful land by coming with me on this journey from prehistory to the present day, right here at the History of Sacramento, Georgia. You can find us on our website, historyofsacramento.com, or on Twitter at history_Georgia. Sacramento is spelled SAQARTVELO.
As I mentioned earlier, at the time of the arrest, the authorities really had no idea how he gotten from Auburn and Sacramento to LA. Again, like I said, later it's going to be determined he took the bus. And it was at his friend's house in Wilmington, California, that 15 to 20 law enforcement from the Long Beach Police Department would surround the house. The police actually will phone the house, and Suarez will come out almost immediately with his hands in the air, and then he was taken into custody. Now, once they arrived at the station, they begin to question him. And again, he says that he had, in fact, murdered the two men, and he will admit to murdering the two children, but he will state blatantly that he did not rape anyone. His interrogation lasted for around an hour. Suarez's story to the law enforcement was that he got into a heated discussion with the two men, Juan and Jose, his brothers-in-law. They would accuse him of womanizing, which he would deny. He will say that at this point he was carrying his rifle, which Juan would request that he lay on the ground. Suarez would then shoot the men with the rifle and drag their bodies into the hole. He would then return to the trailer, beat Yolanda. He did not know why he beat her, but he would say that he experienced sleeplessness and nervousness. He would then walk the children to the hole. He will say he didn't know what he intended to do with them. During the walk, the girl became tired, so he let go of Jack's hand, which he had been holding the entire time. He picks up and carries Aerel to the rest of the way. Once at the hole where the two men were, that he would then hit the boy with a wooden part of a shovel, then hit the girl too. He put their bodies in the hole and covered them with dirt. He then walks back to the trailer, saw police cars showing up, and then ran up a hill and kind of hid there for a while. And before I want to go on to the next part of his arrest and arraignment is I want to call out a few things that he says in his description, in at least his first confession. if you could call this like his first confession, because by this point he's already confessed to his cousin in Sacramento, he's confessed to Torres in Wilmington, and he confessed to the police and the FBI in the car on the way over to the station. So we're going on like, number 4 at this point. But some things that really stood out to me is, number 1, he still says that it's self-defense. Number 2, there's no mention of the rape of Yolanda, but he does say he beat her. Number 3, the one that really, really stuck to me is that he talks about walking the kids to the hole. We know from the autopsy report that the children were beaten mercilessly, but in his description of it, it's almost like an uncle taking his niece and nephew for a nice walk. He also says he hit them with a stick, when we know for a fact from autopsy reports that the children were beaten in excess of 7 or 8 times, each with a shovel. And then he says he placed them in a hole and put dirt on them. Not that they were awake with their mouths open and that's what killed them. So this one was, I don't understand that disconnect between, I'm taking responsibility for some of it, but I'm not going to take responsibility for all of it. I mean, he admits to killing the children, and I can't imagine that he doesn't know. So that part was really hard for me to go over.
To me, when I think about the rape part, I was thinking about it because he keeps denying it, that either he at first was trying to do the self-defense, so why would he rape someone if he was doing self-defense? The other thing is pride, because she rejected him twice, so he didn't that. But the other thing was, from the first episode, we learned that there was no semen or anything, and what if he wasn't able to do it? Not that he didn't try, but that as a guy, he wasn't able to finish.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Sean. Those definitely could be reasons why he was doing it. That disconnect between she rejected me and I'm not going to admit that I did that, or if what you said about his defense of saying it was self-defense, I had to kill him because they were after me. If I stopped to rape Yolanda, that kind of pokes a hole in
It's kind of hard, though. I don't think he could technically ever, even in his mind, think that he was threatened by a 5 or 3-year-old.
No, I think that's another one of it's not. Yeah, okay, great. If by some weird stretch of the imagination you can admit that was self-defense for the 2 men, it's a 5 and 3-year-old.
Right.
There's no self-defense for that.
I don't know what's going through his head exactly, but I feel like in all of these descriptions, he's trying to make himself, like you guys are saying, sound a little bit better, even though he's murdered 2 adults and 2 children, and probably had the intention of murdering Yolanda as well.
Mm-hmm.
With the rape, I think, based on what Yolanda says he said to her during that crime, it seems very clear kind of to me that, or at least based on those words, that he murdered 4 people just because she rejected him. And I think that's a pretty disgusting crime. So he's trying to, I don't know, in his own mind,
almost
come up with ways that it's not quite that bad.
Exercise it that this wasn't done because of Yolanda. I did this for other reasons, but in a fact, yeah. And I don't think, given the fact that she testifies to their earlier altercations, it's a hard stretch to say that this is a reason for anything other than he's pissed off and angry that she rejected him. And again, we know this after the fact, but we know that his wife Isabel says that she's jealous, and the fact that that he admits that the 2 brothers were angry at him for being a kind of a lech and a womanizer, stop messing around on our sister kind of thing. And I can 100% see that avenue too. And that if that got back to his wife, he would lose whatever semblance of family he would have with his, and again, even though his wife's trying to get a divorce from him, he still maybe in his mind says, I have that, I don't want to lose that. So Suarez would eventually be transported to the Placer County and be housed at the Placer County Jail. He'd be interrogated the next morning by Sergeant Bob McDonald. Remember, Bob McDonald's wife is the cashier at the local Longs. And Detective Michael Bennett. Interpreter Frank Valdez, he translates all the questions into Spanish. A tape of this interrogation will be played during his trial. Now, here again, during this interrogation, he would recount the story of the shooting of Juan and Jose during an argument. So he brings up, it was an argument, self-defense. He would say that he would beat Yolanda. This time, however, he would admit to touching her vagina. Which, again, it's just I hit her, I beat her, but I just touched her vagina. I didn't actually rape her. He says the children cried, and then he would tape their mouths to quiet them. He would then remove the tape and then walk with the children outside the trailer. He would say that they were crying and that they wanted to see their father, so he would walk them to the place where he had shot Jose and Juan. It was there that he would hit them with a stick and place them in the hole with the other two men. And then he would, again, and this is from his confession, I placed them in the hole and then I placed dirt on them. Eventually, during this interrogation, he would admit that he'd been planning this for over a week. He would also admit that he had dug the hole earlier in the week. He'd also say that he took the wallets and jewelry, so if the bodies were discovered, they would be harder to identify. He'd say that he had killed the children because he had no other way out of the situation. Again, during this interrogation, he would claim that he had suffered from sleeplessness and nervousness, and that those had actually affected his actions. Now, while Suarez was being interrogated by authorities, investigators were making a case with the evidence that they were finding at the crime scene. They found that the casings found inside the grave, remember the 22 casings, and the 3 found around the trailer had all been fired from Suarez's rifle. Bullet fragments that were recovered from Juan and Jose's bodies could also have been fired from the gun. And the DNA collected at the scene around the shovel, Suarez's pants, Yolanda's blue underwear, and the scissors were all pointing in the same direction. And that Yolanda and Suarez could not be eliminated as contributors of the DNA. The reason why I worded it that way, and I was interesting to read these reports, was that, remember, this is 1998, and DNA collection is not what it is today. But I was interested that the reports mentioned that they could not be eliminated. This will all be brought up at trial, but it goes to that there could only be a 1 in 21,000 chance that it could come from somewhere else. And I say this because sometimes we've talked a lot about, as we've done this podcast, that certain evidence was taken as gospel. Like, I remember when we talked about the Karen Knott case and the questions about fiber evidence. We know from our own discussions and research outside of this that even DNA evidence can come into question sometimes. But I really like the way that the FBI and the police officers kind of framed their reports as something that's saying that we're not saying that this is definitely bullets that were fired from this gun. We're saying that it is more than likely from this gun. We're not saying that this DNA directly points to Suarez, but if it points to anybody else, it's a 1 in 21,000 chance. You know, and so when we talk about a circumstantial case, it's not a circumstantial case. It's all of these little bricks. I mean, we know who did it. Yolanda says it herself, but in order to make this case, they're laying all of this foundation to say there is no other choice that you're going to have except for convicting this guy. There's also Suarez's fingerprints found all over the duct tape fragments. So that, remember, the duct tape in the children's hair and over their mouth, over Yolanda and over the 2 men. His fingerprints are all over that. At the time of the arrest and charging, Placer County DA Brad Finocchio will call for special circumstances because of the severity and brutality of the crime, as well as the age of the 2 youngest victims. All this will align to meaning that the state will seek the death penalty when they went to trial. At this point, I'd like to draw attention to something else that was reported on July 22nd, 1998. In an article of the Sacramento Bee, it would be reported that Placer County Sheriff's Office would be in contact with federal agencies to make sure that they were proceeding with investigations according to the guidelines in manners like this. And this is due to the fact that Suarez is a Mexican national. He was working here legally. He had come and he was working on the ranch. Again, remember, he went to Mexico. He went to Sacramento, was going to Sacramento to work on immigration paperwork, like a work visa. And there are certain things that have to be done to make sure that the law is followed when dealing with arresting a citizen of another country. I bring this up now because this will be something that the defense will call back to during the trial as the trial unfolds. Deputy DA Thomas Beatty will say, quote, We'll be in touch with the Attorney General's office to make sure that we're complying with international law, unquote. The other thing that I think is important to bring up at this point, too, is that at no point did the police, the DA's office, the FBI think that this case wasn't important. That this becomes their top priority, actually, which I think is a good. Sometimes I know the question of, well, if the victims aren't white and upper middle class, then nobody pays attention. And at least for Auburn and Sacramento area and Galt area, that's not the case. With this family means something, and these people take this very, very seriously. As law enforcement is making the case against Suarez and the DA's office is getting ready for arraignment that's to follow, there's still the question of Yolanda and the bodies of her family. They were to be sent back to Mexico to be buried with other family of Yolanda and Juan's. But Yolanda is alone and does not have any money for this. Remember, her husband and brother are the main breadwinners of the family. So she's here by herself. This is 3 days after she was brutally raped and her entire family that was living with her is killed. And there's a question of, how do we get her family back to where they want to be buried, and how is Yolanda going to survive this? The Placer County Undersheriff steps in and organizes the state's Victim and Witness Fund to provide $3,500 per victim for the costs that will be associated with transporting the bodies of her family back to their final resting place. And I think, again, this is something that I looked at when I was reading this, and I thought that's amazing that the undersheriff, and if you're not familiar, the undersheriff is a sheriff generally in California is an elected position, and the undersheriff is the person right underneath them that's not an elected position. So this is a sheriff that has worked his way up or her way up to the position, and they are the kind of highest unelected position in the sheriff's department. And this person is saying, our department is going to take it on ourselves. We'll do the paperwork. We'll make sure that Yolanda's family gets back to where they would want to be buried. Eventually, in late July of 1998, Arturo Juarez Suarez was arraigned in Placer County Court. It will take a little longer because there was a conflict of interest with the Spanish translator that was hired by the court. It seems that they had done some work for the prosecution in collecting potential witness statements. As we said, a lot of the potential witnesses and people that would be called to stand are not native English speakers, so they require a translator. So the defense said, well, we don't want that translator to be in the court as an impartial because they already worked for the court. Due to this, it's not until late August that Suarez will be enter his plea of innocent of all charges. This would be around 3 weeks after the murders, the rape, and his arrest. He will be represented by public defender Les Tauman. Judge Richard Cousins will set August 25th as the date to work out some of the details around the preliminary trial. There are a lot of procedural things that had to be worked out in this case. And this was due to the fact that they're dealing with a death penalty offense, as well as issues of how to proceed with a Mexican national being arrested in the United States. And the DA's office want to make sure that all of this is done correctly. Yolanda states at a press conference, quote, "I won't rest until I get justice. I want that desgraciado dead. I want him executed. It isn't fair that my children swallowed dirt and he's swallowing food," unquote. Here's where we'll end this episode with the Suarez arraignment. We will continue this in our next episode that deals with the winding road of this case and takes us through the courts and the issues that the victim will face while trying to get justice for her family and to support herself. And with our cold case tonight is Jessica.
It has been 15 years since the night of August 7th, 2006, when at approximately 10:23 p.m., Robert Plasencia was gunned down while walking home from his father's house in the Meadowview area of Sacramento, California. He was just 2 blocks from his home. This murder happened within 30 hours of 2 other such drive-by shootings. Police do not think this event is connected to the other 2 and believe that Robert's shooting was a case of mistaken identity. As of now, detectives have not identified any suspects in the case and are urging anyone that might have information to help solve this case to come forward. There is a $50,000 reward that has been issued and still remains active for any information leading to an arrest. Robert left a son behind when he was killed who was 1 year old at the time. Deborah Vasquez, his mother, said to the press, quote, "I'm so tired. I just want closure. I just want justice. That's all I want." Vasquez said he loved his son and wanted to do everything for him. She pleads to the killer in an interview with a local TV station, quote, "Confess. Do your time. I've been doing time since this happened. My children have been doing time since this happened. There's not been one day that goes by that I don't open my eyes and look at my Rob's picture." Please contact Detective Kirtland at the Sacramento Police Department Homicide Unit at 916-808-0678 if you have any information. Callers that wish to remain anonymous may be eligible for a reward of up to $1,000 through the Crime Alert at 916-443-HELP or text in a tip to 274637. If you do text that tip, enter SACTIP, SACTIP, followed by the tip information.
Thanks for listening to this episode of California True Crime. For a full list of sources as well as more information on the case, head over to our webpage at californiatruecrime.com, where you can support the show by joining our Patreon, which has the option of ad-free episodes. Our web store is up and running with some new California True Crime merchandise, t-shirts, mugs, and special edition exclusive stickers. If you'd like to contact us, find us on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Cali True Crime. Make sure that you are subscribed to our show to get our latest episodes. Leave us a 5-star review or tell a friend to get the word out about California True Crime. We'd like to thank our quality control engineer, Melanie Duncan. This was recorded at Snail Ranch Studios and The Hangar. This has been a production of Way Grimace.